Hello and welcome to the course Developing Soft Skills and Leadership through Indian Knowledge System. In today's lecture, that is, we shall be talking about the concept of cooperation and conflict resolution that has been presented in Indian thought. So, before we delve deeper into this concept of conflict and cooperation, because let us quickly look at what we mean by this concept called conflict and cooperation. We know that conflict is an inherent aspect of human interaction arising from differences in values, interests, beliefs and access to resources. We had in previous lecture just talked about the concept of Sangha, and previous lectures also have been talked about on team and teamwork. We know that when we work in a particular team, there are chances that we can have certain kind of conflict based on the ideas of values, interests, beliefs and access to resources. Because people come from different backgrounds, they may have different value system, they may have different interests or beliefs and or resources, and their understanding is shaped by these values, interests and beliefs. So, therefore, there are chances that conflict may arrive in what you call these groups. So, how this conflict can be managed or can be addressed, that is a major question. When we look at Indian thought, we know that conflict is not viewed merely as a disruptive force, but as a natural and inevitable condition that requires ethical and harmonious resolution. When we were talking about Sangha, if you remember, we talked about the concept of deep deliberation, which is at the crux or what you call core of the concept of Sangha. Means everything that is achieved in a Sangha is deliberation and discussion. So, conflict can be seen as not a disruptive force, but a kind of a perspective or a kind of a point of view, and various points of views can be deliberated and discussed, and probably the consensus or the ultimate decision, if it is formed on the basis of deliberation, I think the conflict not only can be avoided, but we can reach to a very enriching decision which incorporates various perspectives, values, beliefs, interests and backgrounds. So, we can reach cooperation, even if there is a conflict or within a particular Sangha or a team. And cooperation is not simply working together, but a value based mode of interaction that is seen as both a social practice and an ethical principle. So, we look at cooperation is not a kind of working together, but it is a way of addressing all kind of value based mode of interaction, right. And it should also always be seen, cooperation should always be seen as a social practice and an ethical principle at the same time. We know that in Indian thought there is always a shift, what you call, or brings about, if we invest in Indian thought, probably we would be in a position to bring about that kind of shift in focus, that conflicts should not always be thought from the perspective of winning them, right. It is not that if there is a conflict, one particular party must win that particular conflict. Rather, conflicts are transforming agents, and how conflicts may be transformed into cooperation, right. And how can conflict be translated into cooperation? By deliberation and discussion, where you should reach to a mutual consensus, right. And this would probably ensure a very long term social harmony and stability. This would ensure long term social harmony and stability, and therefore Indian thought has always focused on not on winning conflicts, but transforming conflicts into cooperation, right, by deliberation, discussion, reaching to a mutual consensus. This idea has been emphasized on the basis of collective harmony, right, which is deeply rooted in Vedic thought. In Rig Veda, it has been said, Sangachadum, Samvadadum, Samvomanasi Janatam, Deva Bhagyam Ythapurve, Sajjananam Upasate. Let's move together, let's move in harmony and speak in one particular voice. May all be wise, and may our minds be in agreement, just as the ancient gods share their portion of sacrifice. So, this conflict may be addressed by this particular fact that if you bring about harmony and unity amongst your team, if your mind and the mind of all may all be wise and our minds be in agreement, probably we must learn from ancient gods who have been accepting the portion of sacrifice without any kind of conflict. So, this could be a motivation for us if you look at ancient gods who have been accepting their portion of sacrifice without any conflict. So, similarly we can work in a particular team or a sangha without having any kind of conflict. Rather, we should focus on every kind of cooperation amongst ourselves. So, if we look at philosophical foundations of conflict resolution in Indian thought, we look at that the Indian approaches to cooperation and conflict resolutions are deeply rooted in a set of foundational philosophical concepts. They are dharma, or ethical duty and righteousness, right. So, if your acts are based on what you call ethical duty and righteousness, there are chances that you would be in a position to bring about cooperation, because dharma or ethical duty and righteousness are not oriented towards individual gain, but to accommodate and to address and to orient towards what you call the general people, the masses and the social welfare, right. And therefore, there are less chances, because when we look at conflict, it may arise because you may be looking forward to some kind of personal gain. But if you are in a position to perform selfless action and orient your actions towards what you call the general masses based on ethical duty and righteousness, there are less chances that you would be practicing any kind of conflict. We know that ahimsa should always be practiced, non-violence. That means wherever there is a conflict, it should be addressed based on what you call deliberation and dialogue, and not practicing any kind of ahimsa or any kind of hinsa or violence. That means everything should be achieved in a non-violent manner. Everything should be achieved based on deliberation and dialogue. So, diplomacy should be practiced before any kind of violence. So, probably diplomacy can bring about conflict resolution and establish cooperation. Samvada or dialogue and deliberation is also emphasized as one of the methods of achieving what you call conflict resolution in Indian thought. Samvada is engaging in dialogue and deliberation, and I think that is one of the most efficient way of addressing any kind of conflict. If there are two parties or more than two parties engaged in any kind of conflict, and if there is a sustained dialogue and deliberation takes place, I am sure that both the parties reach to a particular consensus, that is a mutual agreeable solution, and therefore they can avoid any kind of conflict. And finally, Rita or cosmic order and balance. So, this cosmic order and balance would probably also be one of the philosophical foundations of conflict resolution, where everything is worked not towards personal gain, but for cosmic order and balance. And therefore, conflict may be understood as a disturbance of cosmic and social harmony, and its resolution involves restoring balance rather than defeating an opponent, right. So, let's not be engaged in any kind of individual conflict, right, or if there is a conflict, it must be understood that it is a kind of disturbance of cosmic and social harmony, and social harmony and cosmic balance should be maintained. You should not try to address the conflict as a kind of an individual gain or individual fight. Thus, cooperation may emerge not as a strategy, but as a kind of moral and ontological necessity within the Indian worldview, right. And we have many examples from Indian knowledge system where this conflict has been addressed as not only as a kind of strategy, but as a moral and ontological necessity. Like let's look at an example of conflict between Ma Durga and ahimsa and Mahishasur, right. What Mahishasur has exactly been doing is that he is trying to disturb the cosmic and social harmony of the society, right. And therefore, this resolution of conflict by Ma Durga has been achieved as a kind of necessity of what we call moral and ontological necessity to establish what we call the moral and social balance in the society. So, Ma Durga has achieved this conflict resolution with Mahishasur not as a kind of a personal gain, not as a kind of an individual fight or as a defeating an opponent, but it was an act of bringing about moral and ontological necessity to restore the balance by killing Mahishasur. So, the conflict resolution becomes more moral and what we call ontological necessity in Indian thought. So, when we look at conflict and on what levels conflict has been operating, we understand that Indian knowledge system conflict may operate at many levels. They could be interpersonal, social and political levels, right. So, you may have some interpersonal issues because of which there is a conflict, or there is a social reason for your conflict. There may be political reasons as well, right. So, it may cause the differences in values or resource inequalities or ideological disagreements. They may be at the core of what we call conflict. So, in Indian knowledge system, it says that conflict largely emerges from what you call artha, that is self-interest and material needs. When material needs and self-interest dominates, this conflict may emerge, and cooperation becomes possible only when your actions are guided by what you call dharma or ethics. So, we can clearly see here that the conflict largely talks about the individual and individuals what you call interest in personal and material needs, while cooperation on the other side emphasizes on the fact that you should rise above from your individuality and should always regulate your actions towards dharma or ethics, which talks about the larger reality of the greater number of people. So, that means we know that this multi-layered understanding allows that in Indian traditions conflict may be addressed in a very holistic manner, combining ethical, psychological and structural approaches, right. So, the only thing that probably the one important thing that we have learned from here is that you should rise above from your personal self-interest and material needs because they may land you in conflictual situations. Rather, you should always try to relate your perspective with dharma or ethics, because then probably you would not land in any kind of conflict and you would think about the others more than you think about yourself. Now, the question is, how can conflict be resolved? Though we have hinted that conflict may be resolved when you assume the position of dharma or ethics, or when you assume the position of lok sangra, that means welfare and harmony of larger number of people, the conflict may be resolved. We look at that in Indian conflict resolution system, it's quite or fundamentally cooperation oriented, because the goal in addressing a conflict in Indian knowledge system is not punishment, but it's a more of preservation of relationships, promoting social harmony and maintaining collective well-being. We know that when we try to address conflict in Indian knowledge system, the idea is not to defeat one particular person or one particular party, but to engage in deep deliberation and deep discussion to reach to a mutually consensus result or decision, where both the party agree to one particular decision, right. So, it is very collaborative, it is very collective and quite harmonious method of what you call conflict resolution that has been presented in Indian thought. We at the same time are aware about the fact that conflict is often treated as a community issue rather than individual dispute in Indian knowledge system, which emphasizes shared responsibility and collective healing, right. So, we know that conflict is not a kind of an individual dispute, it is an individual dispute than a community issue, right. So, that can be resolved very easily. This cooperative vision is expanded in the idea from what you call Maha Upanishad. We have already highlighted Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. If you think the entire world as one family, probably you rise above from your individual disputes, individual perspectives, and would associate your understanding with shared responsibility and collective healing, right. So, the entire onus of conflict resolution lies on widening your mind, your understanding, and rising above from your individuality to what you call associating yourself more with the collective well-being and collective healing, which is being presented in your knowledge system as Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. That means the entire world is one family, and if you think that the entire world is one family, there is less chance of what you call having individual interest, rather you would think about collective well-being. Now, in samvada may be treated as a method of resolution in Indian thought. Samvada is a dialogue or deep deliberation and discussion which occupies a very central place in Indian approach to conflict resolution. It involves rational discussion, mutual understanding and truth seeking. That means samvada, where you can engage in samvada or dialogue and discussion and deliberation in order to address the concept or the situation of conflict, where rational discussions may take place. So, any kind of conflictual situation should rationally be addressed. What is the logic of your conflict, right? And then you should reach to a mutual understanding as to how conflict may be addressed by both the party. And if ultimately your aim is to seek truth, probably both of the parties agree to a mutual consensus. So, it's not about winning an argument. Conflict is not about winning an argument, but through samvad you may seek to arrive at a consensus and restore harmony, right. So, we know that conflict always threatens the social harmony and social structure, and if you engage in samvad, you probably would be in a position to seek to a particular consensus where you are going to restore that particular harmony. So, through samvad, conflict is resolved not through domination, but through alignment of perspectives. You are trying to align perspectives. We know that we have conflictual perspectives, we have perspectives which are differing, right. So, how are you going to put together those differing perspectives in an alignment? And therefore, in the modern times, this samvad may be aligned with modern ideas of negotiation and communication, right. So, if you are always involved in such practices of negotiating, of deep deliberation, rational discussion, and with an ultimate aim of reaching to a mutual understanding and truth seeking, probably you can address conflict in a very non-violent manner, right. So, the idea is not to win a particular conflictual situation, but agreeing on or aligning on perspectives, right, and that can be done through diplomacy, what you call samvada, dialogue, discussion and deliberation. So, discussion and deliberation are at the core or one of the important methods of conflict resolution that has been presented here. Now, if you look at Hindu traditions, we find that in Hindu traditions they have always been conceptualizing conflict resolution through dharma. We have briefly talked about dharma, or which governs the individual and social conduct. That means dharma is a practice where one is trying to align his or her own perspective with a larger social conduct. So, there is this conflict is may be resolved by incorporating dharma in your behavior, where you are trying to align your perspectives with the larger good. Bhagavad Gita and Mahabharata illustrate certain examples of this kind, where moral dilemmas, ethical decision making and justified conflict when aligned with dharma have been presented. So, we always look at this case of Mahabharata, right, and when we look at Arjun into a situation of conflict within himself. Conflict is not always external, it can be internal as well, and Arjun was suffering from an internal conflict where he was not in a position to associate his individual position with that of larger moral and social conduct. And that is why Lord Krishna have motivated and made him clear by a deep discussion or deliberation that you should always think about a larger reality of social and moral conduct than of individual self, right, and then probably Arjun was motivated to participate in this particular conflict or war of Mahabharata, which was not about the individual satisfaction of Arjun, but it was a general method of establishing the moral and moral harmony of the entire society, which was being disturbed by the unethical army of the Kauravas. So, what has been prescribed here is that in situations where conflict becomes unavoidable, what Bhagavad Gita has said, that swadharmapi chavecha nag vikampitu maharshi. That means considering your duty, you should not waver from this particular situation. So, what conflict is not rejected, but ethically regulated, right, and it ensures that it serves justice rather than personal gain. And we can never have this a better example than the case of Arjun, where he participates in this conflictual situation and try to restore the moral and social order of the state, not as a personal gain, but rather serving justice to the larger people. When we look at the Buddhist perspective, the teachings of Gautam Buddha locate the root of conflict in desire, ignorance and ego. So, we know that it is again a very internal method of locating conflict, where he says that conflict lies when you are deeply rooted in the idea of desire or ignorance and ego. This perspective views conflict resolution not from external action, rather to internal transformation, emphasizing emotional regulation and awareness. So, what he means is that it is not only the external actions which are at times needed for conflict resolution, but you should internally transform yourself by emphasizing on your emotional regulation and awareness, right. So, if you walk through a journey which is internal, you would probably be in a position to locate your desires, ignorance and ego. And if you are in a position to avoid and to address the desire, ignorance and ego, probably you can reach to a particular situation where you can avoid conflict. What Dhammapada states, nahi veren vedani sammantitha kudachanam avirena cha sammanti is dhammo sanantano. That means we should not always try to increase the what you call conflict by getting yourself into counter arguments, right? And that's why he says hatred is never appeased by hatred in this world, right? So you should not you may not always address conflict by counter argument, rather it may be appeased by love or non-hatred alone, right? So you may practice some kind of mutual cooperation, and that is an eternal law. So this highlights that conflict resolution does not require retaliation always, but following a middle path through compassion and inner discipline. And in Indian thought, Hindu thought as well, this middle path has been emphasized through deliberation and discussion, while in Buddhist thought this middle path may be achieved through compassion and inner discipline, right? If you have compassion for others and if you have inner discipline by regulating your desire, ignorance and ego, probably you can achieve a situation where you can avoid any kind of conflictual situation. If we look at Jain perspective, in Jain philosophy also, it contributes significantly through conflict resolution by practicing ahimsa or non-violence and accommodating multiplicity of perspectives, or what we call anekantavada, right? We know that if you work in a sangha or in a team, there are people who have multiplicity of perspectives, and these multiplicity of perspectives may be accommodated in the concept of anekantavada, and they can be accommodated by deep discussion and deliberation, and then probably you can reach to a mutual consensus. So almost all Indian thoughts are highlighting on the fact of ahimsa, that is non-violence, accommodating multiplicity of perspectives, right? The concept of dharma and lok sangra, and reaching to a mutual consensus without an intention of defeating the other. What anekantavada suggests is that no single perspective should hold absolute truth, right? It's not one individual who is at most important and his values are more important than others. Rather, the focus should be on truth. Truth is a multidimensional encouraging tolerance and openness, which are essential for resolving conflicts. So the idea of truth has been highlighted, and truth is not a single dimensional aspect, rather truth is a multidimensional aspect. Truth is the one which is always related to a greater reality of all human beings, all living beings on this earth. And therefore, what is highlighted is that no individual reality is important in conflict resolution, but you should always think from multi-dimensional way in order to avoid any kind of conflicting situation. So therefore, conflict may be reduced by accepting multiple viewpoints and practicing intellectual humility, right? So if we are in a position to accommodate multiple viewpoints, if we are in a position to practice empathy and think from the other's perspective at the same time, and if we practice intellectual humility, according to Jain perspective, the conflict may be resolved or conflict may be addressed. If you look at Kautilya's model of strategic framework for conflict resolution, we find that he has been presenting a systematic model of conflict resolution through four major ways. One is Sama, this is conciliation and dialogue, and then Dham, that is incentive, and the third is Bheda, division or strategic pressure, and finally Danda or punishment. So what he says is that the first the position that should be followed for conflict resolution is the conciliation or dialogue. Dialogue is the first thing that you should practice in order to avoid any kind of conflict, diplomacy, and then you try to put or give some incentives to reach to a particular consensus, and finally you should have strategic pressure to address any kind of division or bheda, or bheda should be employed as a strategic pressure, and finally it prescribes punishment. But if you look at this model which emphasizes greater approach, though this Kautila's model is little different from other models that we have already talked about, other perspectives, because it prescribes dand as or punishment also as part of what you call conflict resolution. But what we look here is that punishment is recommended only as a last resort, highlighting the importance of negotiation and diplomacy, right. So, but if you look at, though this model prescribes what you call punishment here, is that is a last resort, that is not preferred, but when you fail through sam, dam and bhed, then only probably you can have punishment as a last resort, right, where through this we find that he is putting more importance and emphasis on negotiation and diplomacy but rather than punishment. So, but Kautilya's model may also be, or at times is followed by what you call foreign policy of any particular country, where they are engaging in dialogue and reconciliation, and then incentives, and then finally division or strategic pressure, and if everything fails, they probably resort to what you call punishment or danda. So, if you look at indigenous knowledge system, we find that panchayat and community resolutions may also be employed as one of the methods of what you call conflict resolution. We know that traditional Indian systems like panchayat always emphasizes that local participation, consensus building and informal mediation. We know that panchayat almost includes, it's very inclusive space where each and everyone participates, and based on the discussion and deliberation that takes place in panchayat, it tries to reach to a consensus building, right, and that is through informal mediation. These systems demonstrate how cooperation operates at the very grassroots level, making conflict resolution accessible and culturally embedded. So, we find that conflict resolution is highly culturally embedded in Indian system, because at a very grassroots level, where in a very remote societies, the conflict resolution is practiced through such systems as panchayat and communities. We look at Puranic narratives as problem solving frameworks. We know that in ancient Indian knowledge systems, we have many examples like King Prithu and goddess Durga, who have been providing the conflict resolution frameworks, where wisdom is being preferred over any kind of force, or ethics is being preferred over any kind of power, right. Let's look at the example of King Prithu, right. King Prithu is the one who is depicted in the Bhagavad Purana as an example of ethical leadership, which is highly grounded in dharma and public welfare. And we have a particular example of how he has practiced diplomacy, where he emerging to restore order after a period of misrule, where earth has stopped producing any kind of or stopped nourishing humanity. So, what he has done is that he is being portrayed as a ruler who treated kingship as a sacred duty rather than personal power, and therefore, his particular dialogue with the earth, whom he persuaded to nourish humanity again, symbolizes a very balanced and responsible approach to governance and respect both people and nature, right. So, how he has practiced what you call diplomacy and dialogue in order to restore the moral and social order, right, where he is showing respect both to people and nature, and thus Prithu represents a kind of leader who combines accountability, compassion and a moral wisdom to ensure justice and prosperity. Similarly, we look at the example of Ma Durga, who symbolizes wisdom or Gyan, which is overcoming chaos through her iconic battle with Mahishasur that I have just referred to. Mahishasur represents instability, ego and disorder, and constantly changing forms to create confusion and imbalance. So, he is in fact a threat to the entire social and moral order of the society. So, Ma Durga remains calm, focused and composed, demonstrating that true wisdom is not reactive but guided by clarity and inner strength. Her victory signifies that chaos can be transformed not merely by force but through insight, balance and righteous action aligned with dharma. Her multiple arms holding weapons bestowed by different gods reflect the integration of diverse forms of knowledge and capability. This suggests that wisdom is multidimensional, requiring courage, discipline, strategy and moral awareness. Even in the intensity of battle, Durga's serene expression highlights that wisdom operates with steadiness amidst turmoil. Thus, she represents enlightened power, showing that when knowledge and virtue guide action, chaos is not only defeated but converted into order and harmony. So, non-violence may also be treated as an active strategy. Non-violence in Indian thought is not passive but an active strategy which involves moral persuasion, dialogue, resistance without harm. Though we have a few examples from Indian knowledge system where violence has been practiced, but it was a last resort when all channels have failed, then only. Otherwise, what we have seen is that in Indian knowledge system, non-violence is the most preferable practice that has been adopted. We look at the example of or the philosophy of Mahatma Gandhi, for instance, where conflict is resolved through ethical ideology of truth and non-violence rather than coercion. We look at the Indian freedom struggle, where Mahatma Gandhi is an embodiment of a conflict resolution without practicing any kind of violence means. He has always adopted the ideology of truth and non-violence and achieved the conflict resolution based on the idea of non-violence, suggesting that such cases as the Indian freedom struggle, which may also be achieved through non-violence means. So, in conclusion, what we find is that in Indian knowledge system, it is providing a very comprehensive ethical and practical framework for cooperation and conflict resolution. It has emphasizes harmony over victory, dialogue over domination and cooperation over competition. This is precisely what we can learn from Indian knowledge system. Thank you for listening to me patiently. In case you have any doubt or questions, kindly let me know.